Well, your mom said it was good for you, and she was right. It turns out that playing the piano, or any instrument for that matter, can actually improve the way a child thinks. Something to consider as schools across the country cut back on music programs. And it's not just kids, it's adults too. As Marcia Brandwin reports, there is new scientific evidence that music strikes a chord not only in our hearts, but also in our brains.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
Everybody has some kind of relationship with music, and everybody wants to be smarter.
What happens when a child learns a nursery song? Or an adult spends an evening at the symphony? Or anyone learns to play the piano? Probably more than you realize.
You're doing something that you never guessed you would be doing, and that is enhancing higher brain function.
In other words, can music make you smarter?
We found that college students that listen to Mozart score better on abstract reasoning IQ tests.
It's called the Mozart effect. Psychologist Fran Rauscher and physicist Gordon Shaw identified it last fall.
It's something to do with music and the brain and reasoning, and it all came together, and I think it captured everyone's imagination.
Shaw and Rauscher's research implies that listening to certain music can actually make people smarter. In separate studies involving 115 college students, Shaw and Rauscher found that after just listening to this Mozart sonata for only 10 minutes, students' spatial reasoning ability significantly improved.
Now, why is this a big deal? What is spatial reasoning, actually?
It's something that's used by everybody every day. When you're doing architecture, graphic design, looking at maps, anything that requires an understanding of how objects fit together in space and in time.
Think about a game like chess. It requires the kind of thinking you do when you have to visualize things in your mind. Like this. Here is a piece of paper, which gets folded this way, then this way. Now a square is cut out, like this. Try to visualize which of these four shapes it will look like when it is unfolded. To do that, you have to use your spatial reasoning skills. If you had listened to Mozart's sonata for two pianos before trying the test, you would be more likely to pick the correct answer. This one.
Write your answers now.
Shaw and Rauscher used the paper folding test in an experiment with student volunteers at UC Irvine.
Number 6.
After listening to this particular piece of Mozart, student scores on the tests improved 30%. But students who sat in silence or listened to this piece by contemporary composer Philip Glass and this British techno-pop music improved significantly.
We think that the Mozart effect can be described as sort of a tuning up or a structural organization of these neural pathways that's going on when you're listening to music.
So where did this idea come from? You're looking at a computer model of the speed and intensity of the human brain at work. It has a rhythm and a pattern to it. By chance, while working with graduate student Xiaodan Lang, Gordon Shaw discovered a striking similarity between these patterns or rhythms in our brain and the sound of music. It led the researchers to predict that certain music, like Mozart, could enhance brain function.
It may be simply that his music is activating something that's pre-wired in us, something that's very natural for us to enjoy. It's organized in a very sort of symmetrical, patterned way.
But it's not as simple as just wallpapering the world with classical music.
Should high school teachers be blaring Mozart as they're teaching their math classes?
It might interfere, depending.
Overload.
Yeah, right.
What do you suppose listening to rock and roll does to your brain?
Probably not the same thing as Mozart.
Maybe future researchers will identify a Rolling Stones effect. But today, Shaw and Rauscher think music of any type, as long as it is complex and patterned, could have the same effect as Mozart. And still, no matter what the music, the effect wears off in a matter of minutes.
Why does it only last for 10 minutes in your estimation?
Because it's just a listening effect.
It's passive rather than active. You're not really making music, you're just listening to it.
So what about making music? Remember when your mom forced you to sit at the piano and practice, practice, practice?
Silly. Your half hour isn't up yet.
But gee, Mom, I've done it almost 1,000,000 times.
Was Mom really onto something? That's what Shaw and Rauscher wanted to find out. The first step was to bring music training to several preschools, like this one in Long Beach, California. Singing lessons became part of the daily routine.
Good job.
And the 3-year-olds were given private keyboard lessons once a week.
To the record.
The idea of working with younger children is that their brains are still developing. The neural pathways in their cerebral cortexes are very flexible at that point. They're still forming these connections. And so we think the younger you can do it, the better. Maybe even 2-year-olds would be better than 3-year-olds.
The 3-year-olds were also encouraged to practice at the keyboard during free play.
Can you make your 2 blocks look just like that?
The second step was measuring the kids' spatial reasoning ability,
Good.
which they did before beginning music training and at 3-month intervals for a year.
What's silly about this picture?
They used a series of standard IQ tests, and each time the kids were tested, they showed marked improvement in only one of them, assembling a puzzle. And that supports the theory that the part of the brain strengthened by the music lessons is involved in the puzzle test.
Okay.
So if you play music, if you get them hands-on, what are you actually doing to those children's brains?
Well, the idea is that we believe that you're developing these neural pathways and you're exercising them and making them stronger. It's the same as with a muscle, for example. If the more you use it, the more toned it will be.
What if children have absolutely no talent in music?
The important thing about this is that the concept is that it can work for any child, regardless of musical talent, regardless of educational background. Anybody can benefit from this.
Mozart began playing at 4, composing at 5. It's been said it's impossible to find a parallel to the flawless perfection of his music. Now, scientists are using Mozart's genius to begin to unlock the secret of how we think. And perhaps to expand enormously our capacity to learn, to reason, and to create.
As you heard, it's best for kids to start music training early, at 3 or 4, while their brains are still developing. But our experts say even if your child is older, it's never too late to take up an instrument. And there's even new research being done on how music can benefit the elderly.